from 9 to 2. Wichita narrows down its choices for mayor in an election that tests some new state laws. Plus, a state watchdog begins a new investigation into Sedgwick County Commissioner Michael O'Donnell's campaign finances. We take a look at why. And from unread complaints to a warning to shape up or ship out, Kansas Medicaid program faces some big problems this week. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. This is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. Even as Kansas warned one insurance company it was failing its Medicaid contract, we got news the state had failed to read your complaints about CanCare, raising big concerns about the future of Medicaid services in Kansas. Monday, Kansas Attorney General released a report showing more than 200 emails complaining about CanCare services had gone unread. They were in a government email no one checked. The KC Star reports the AG's office found 42 of those unread emails contained at least partially substantiated claims of waste, fraud, or abuse that weren't checked out. Tuesday, the state told one of the main players in CanCare, Aetna, that it's failing its contract. The Wichita Eagle reports Aetna took over for Amerigroup this year, joining Sunflower State Health Plan and United Healthcare as a Medicaid administrator. A formal letter from the state told Aetna the company has 10 days to figure out how to provide adequate service or be fired. KDHE spokeswoman Ashley Jones-Wisner told the Eagle, quote, "As an agency working to improve the health of all Kansans, we must hold our contractors accountable. It is our hope to work collaboratively with Aetna to come into compliance so they can efficiently and effectively serve members." And joining me on the desk this week to discuss this and more, we have State Representative Christy Williams from Augusta, Republican, and Dr. Neil Allen, political scientist from Wichita State University, and Democrat Jim Ward, State Representative from Wichita. Thank you all so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start off with this. As we look at these two separate issues that kind of came down at the same time, are they different symptoms of the same problem, a lack of oversight, which would be the presumed problem, or are we looking at two separate issues? Christy, I'm going to start with you.
Well, first I'd add that complaints concerning Medicaid are not our most uncommon complaints. And also when you have a transition between administration, you're going to have some gaps in that transition. So I would just say that with Aetna being one of the top 5 insurance companies in the United States, they should know better. And it's their responsibility to get things in check. And I'm so glad that the administration is calling them on the carpet to do so.
Okay. Jim?
I'm going to take the first piece, which is where the state was totally neglected in addressing complaints that were rampant about the privatization of Medicaid. Governor Brownback got mad because the legislature continued to push him to hire qualified people, so he left the position vacant for 2 years, which is why we passed a law taking it from KDH&E and moving it over to the Attorney General. And the Attorney General's had it for 2 years. So we know, my question to the Attorney General is, what are you going to do to fix this problem? Answer the complaints that were ignored, answer the complaints that are coming in today, and make sure that we have a process to take care of the future, because those are Kansans on the ground that can tell you what's happening with those multi-million-dollar private corporations.
I mean, certainly we're talking with major programs like this, there are going to be a lot of complaints, Neil, but these seem to be kind of unusual headlines this week.
Well, I think Representative Williams is right that transitions are difficult between executive administrations. But also, in Kansas, we've been, fighting, both probably metaphorically fighting, but debating now for years about what government should be doing, what government shouldn't be doing. And the question of who should be providing health insurance through government programs like Medicaid or CanCare, as we call it here, nobody in America has a good answer for that yet. And every state is trying to figure it out. And also, there's a smaller number of players all the time that can actually provide services. And the argument for a pure government solution is getting stronger, but this is America, so there's always a countervailing force for private enterprise.
Okay, so that brings me to my next question. I'm going to go back to our lawmakers. Is there something that lawmakers can do to prevent this from happening in the future? Jim?
Absolutely, and we should have been doing it for the last 8 years. Is hold those insurance companies accountable. I don't know what the transition that my two panelists are talking about. We had a failed company, United Medicine, that we got rid of 2 years ago and brought Aetna in, and they appear to be failing too, to deliver timely services at the cost they promised they could do. We as the legislature have a duty to enforce the law and ensure that, and we thought by giving the Inspector General to the Attorney General, who's a qualified lawyer, that would be a big tool in our toolbox. That's the big dysfunction, is we are not holding them accountable. I'm glad the governor sent a letter that said enough is enough. You're either going to get the job done or we're going to go find somebody else.
Okay, Christy?
I was just going to say there is oversight, and it does take a lot of work to follow up on each of these. And the issues that we've had with Aetna are very similar to the issues that we've had with other agencies prior to that. And so absolutely, we're going to have to work harder and do better to get to the bottom of it and make sure that Kansans are taken care of. There's 100,000 enrolled with Aetna, and those 100,000 and their claims, they matter. So we need to get it right.
All right, we're going to let that be the last word on that. There are many other issues that the state is dealing with. Another problem that state lawmakers have been working on this last year, understaffing at state prisons, especially El Dorado. This week, the governor declared the staffing emergency there over. Cake's Lily Wu explains the changes behind that decision.
Here we go.
The El Dorado Correctional Facility is welcoming more officers this year. That includes Corrections Officer Alex Gannon.
12 hours, not 16.
You like the 12-hour shifts?
Yeah, I can't wait for 8-hour shifts though. That'll be nice.
Warden Sam Klein is pleased to announce that officers will return to 8-hour days. Earlier this year, the Kansas governor declared an emergency for 12-hour workdays when there were 88 job vacancies. It's now down to 47.
I won't relax until those people have been here a year. Okay, at that point we know that they are beginning to understand the work that's involved and the difficulties of this task. Today I'm very encouraged that we have new staff on board.
Staffing improvements help with safety in the penitentiary, and those improvements are being attributed to a funding increase. Pay is now at $18.26 per hour, up from $15.75.
The pay increase, I believe it's going to help a lot, especially because it is hard work out here. You do work hard. It's in the heat, and the pay increase will definitely help bring people out.
The warden wants to maintain safety among inmates and employees. He doesn't want to see the disturbances that happened in the summer of 2018.
The smoke you saw rising from the road, there was video footage of that. That was this building on fire, and today we're rebuilding that.
Restrictive housing along with disciplinary action is being implemented so inmates don't abuse staff.
Our goal is that we as a staff will send a better man out than what the court system sent to us.
The 8-hour shifts will begin here in early October. If you're interested in filling any of those vacancies, we have more information on Cake.com. Reporting in El Dorado, Lily Wu, Cake News on your side.
Well, certainly ending the emergency there, good news, but still nearly 50 vacancies. And now then news on Friday that the state, to relieve overcrowding, is going to start moving prisoners to a private prison in Arizona at the end of the summer, up to 360. What needs to happen next to get this situation under control? Neil, I'm going to start with you.
The answer is money, I believe, because operating prisons is expensive. Operating older prisons is often much more expensive than operating newer prisons. And it is interesting that it might be true that the only solution to a problem with Kansas prisons is actually to temporarily outsource that to a private prison 4 or 5 states away, which is certainly not the kind of change that the governor campaigned on. But we just have a limited amount of money, and making changes in corrections quickly is very difficult.
Christy?
I was going to say criminal justice reform would be helpful. More money into mental health will be helpful, alleviating some of the overcrowding that we're finding and the recidivism that occurs. And then on top of that, of course, it's difficult when our unemployment rates are so low. That's a great thing, but it puts a lot of pressure on our public sector as well as our private sector. And so those are challenges that we're going to have for foreseeable future. So, but those are some things that I would start to look at.
Jim?
I think what we've done in the last couple of years in raising the pay of the prison officials that work on the ground has helped make it more attractive. We need to continue to invest in the equipment that they have to have, including body armor, and we need to address the problem that we have way more people in prison than we have beds to take care of them. We're building a new prison in Lansing, but it doesn't at all alleviate our bed space problem. It's very concerning that we're sending people out of state, even temporarily, because if you're going to have any reintegration, family is so important, and if they're gone for 6 months or 5 years, whatever it is, really hard to reintegrate. So we really have to make some tough choices on who gets prison space and why, and what we do for rehabilitation.
Well, and you both kind of brought up the rehabilitation aspect, the criminal justice reform, rehabilitation, because what we are seeing right now, if you look at the numbers, is more people in prison every year, and I believe it's projected to grow by a couple of thousand over the next decade or so. That doesn't help with the problem that we currently have. So what kind of changes can be made that could keep those numbers from growing and maybe even bring them down?
Well, I think the answer is basically as simple as treat people who have drug addiction like people with medical problems, not primarily as having law enforcement problems. And we have tried in this country, and Kansas is not that different than the rest of the states, we have tried to imprison our way out of a drug problem. And the one thing that has caused is massive prison overcrowding. And so we should try something else.
Well, and that brings us back to the money question then. And as we've discussed many times, there's a limited pie. We've got to decide what goes where. If we need more mental health facilities, then we can't spend more money on prisons. You're on the budget committee, where does that go?
I mean, they're always tough decisions when you have schools and growing needs and healthcare needs and so forth. You have to make some decisions. The money isn't free. It comes from someone. And so I would just say that if you want to reduce the prison population, you're going to have to concentrate on the couple of areas that have been mentioned. And the mental health is a huge one. And so yes, maybe there's more preventative measures that we can take that will actually save money in the long run. Because if you're providing people the behavioral health that they need in the community, then they won't get to the more expensive next step, which might be long-term institution for mental health or in the prison system, which is what we do not want.
Jim, I'm seeing a moment of agreement, it looks like.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of mental health. I think we need to invest in basic things like GEDs in prison. We need to have drug and alcohol treatment while you're in prison. We need to have mental health treatment while you're in prison that then is transferable when you get out. And what happens now is well, first of all, there's none going on because we're still trying to hire people to guard them, and we're not doing any rehabilitation. We should start that. And then we should have a seamless way when you get paroled where you can go to those services while you're so we can reduce the churn of people going in and out of prison. That would have a good long-term effect.
Well, I know I have a whole bunch more questions, but we've got other things we need to talk about, so we're going to move on here. Sedgwick County Commissioner Michael O'Donnell had his day in court and won, but now it appears he wants another opinion from the state's campaign finance watchdog, as I show you in this report I filed with Cake News this week.
Michael O'Donnell's political career has been significantly helped by the fact that a jury found him not guilty on several charges. If he would have the Governmental Ethics Commission in Kansas find that he did not violate rules, that would be helpful for him.
Political analyst Dr. Neil Allen says turning to their nearest ethics watchdog is a common move for politicians in legal trouble. Court documents show Brett Berry of the Kansas Governmental Ethics Commission purchased transcripts this week of the trial testimony from 4 of O'Donnell's campaign workers who all testified against him.
Well, I'm obviously very relieved. It feels good to be vindicated on virtually every charge.
That was Michael O'Donnell's reaction in March when the federal jury acquitted him on wire fraud charges that he'd used about $10,500 in campaign donations for personal expenses. That same jury, though, was hung on other charges involving a pair of $1,000 checks he wrote to campaign workers who immediately cashed the checks and returned the money to him. He says the money was for unpaid campaign bonuses. The return was to cover their part of a ski trip. The U.S. attorney can still refile against O'Donnell on those charges.
When there is public scrutiny of a candidate for campaign finance or other ethical abuses, it is somewhat common for them to ask for an official inquiry because it gives them a place and a venue where they can claim that the larger worry about them is not correct.
While the commission would neither confirm nor deny an ongoing investigation, Michael O'Donnell told me it was a self-referral by him and his team. O'Donnell declined further comment at this time.
There's a lot of reasons for candidates to both start processes and then not talk about them. And often their lawyers are telling them to do that.
And I know certainly from covering the O'Donnell trial that there were many things that Michael O'Donnell wanted to say during the course of the investigation and the trial that he said his lawyers would not allow him to speak about. That's not unusual. I've got to say this is the first time I've heard of somebody self-referring to the Ethics Commission, but in that piece, Neil, you had kind of said it's not that unusual in situations like this.
Well, and I study more the U.S. Congress than the Kansas legislature, and it happens somewhat often in the U.S. Congress. Actually, Al Franken, who was a senator from Minnesota, resigned fairly quickly after allegations of sexual harassment. He wanted an ethics committee review, and his big complaint these days is he didn't get to have it, but his own party pushed him out before he could have it. But also the most important thing to note here is that Michael O'Donnell was elected by the citizens of South Wichita for a seat on the Sedgwick County Commission, and those voters are important and so they're in a lot of ways his boss. So it's a very different kind of work situation than mine, where my boss is not the people. My boss is a dean two floors down from me.
And certainly, the other thing we talked about when we did that story, Neil, was how complex campaign finance rules are. And Christy, Jim, you guys have both run for election. You understand that. Talk to me about how difficult it is trying to figure it all out, Jim.
First of all, there's a difference between Congress and the state legislature in terms when a lot of those folks were caught up in abscam, including Senator McCain, they'd ask for their peers to come together and review. We have an ethics commission of professionals who review the rules. I'm going to put the racketeering and the money laundering and all of that over here. That's the U.S. attorney and criminal stuff. Whether he violated the rule, it should be against the rules to do what he did, which is to give campaign people money, go cash it, and then give it back to me for whatever reason. And I don't think it's a legitimate campaign expense to go on a ski trip to Aspen and call it a bonus for good work in the campaign. I don't think that should be legal. Now, I'm not saying Michael O'Donnell broke any of the rules, but if he didn't, we should make those rules and make them that you can't do stuff like that.
Okay. Christy?
I just add that Michael O'Donnell, he has worked with the Ethics Commission. He's been in contact with them. I think a majority of all politicians here in Kansas, as well as Michael, are trying to do the right thing. And if there's been an overreach or an overstep, I think he just want to correct it. And he would make sure that he doesn't do that again. But for right now, I think the review is smart, and I applaud him for taking that step to just ensure that everything is on the up and up and where it needs to be, because he's got a bright future.
This is one time where Christy and I agree. I think the vast majority of people who serve in the legislature want to follow the rules. And they sometimes forget to put the paid for on and do make mistakes. And the vast majority of them fess up, fix the problem, and move on. I think most folks that serve in our jobs want to do the right thing.
And that's pretty much what the former director of the Ethics Commission said when she testified at the trial for the defense. So
correct. They usually allow them to make that correction. They come to them and say that it looks like there's a violation. You may have unwittingly known or didn't know about it, and then they allow them to make that correction.
All right. Well, looking at some other things here in Wichita, the city of Wichita narrowed the field of candidates for mayor down to 2 this week, though the outcome remained uncertain for some until Friday. On Tuesday, more than 22,000 Wichitans headed out to vote for mayor. Jeff Longwell walked away with the most votes, just over 32% of them. His top 2 challengers, Lindy Wells and Brandon Whipple, finished with just over 25% and almost 26% of the vote, respectively. The top 2 finishers move on to the general election. Only 160 votes separated Wells and Whipple, and with hundreds of mail-in ballots still to be counted, it remained uncertain in some minds which of the 2 would move on. A bipartisan panel counted those mail-in ballots Friday morning, unofficially sending Whipple on to the next round, though the results still won't be official until the canvass next Thursday. Now that's a unusual change that caught a lot of people by surprise that came about because of a new state law that mail-in ballots had to be accepted for longer. My understanding is the purpose behind that change is that more votes would be counted. But do we reach the point where more votes counted conflicts with a clear, definitive answer on election night? Neil, I'm going to start with you.
Well, also, we in America have this idea that we need a clear, definitive answer on election night, and that is not how most of the world works. And there's a lot of reasons for that, because counting votes is a highly complicated process, and in America we tend to entrust a lot of it to temporary workers who do one day of training and then work from 5:30 in the morning until 10 o'clock at night. And so, but there's really not a big problem. Jeff Longwell has been my mayor for the last week. He'll be my mayor for the next week. Either he or Representative Whipple will be my mayor come next year. And this particular week of counting ballots will not really make any difference at all.
So we've kind of become, as Americans, that instant gratification society, even when it comes to voting.
We have to be a little bit more patient for that end result, and I think that's actually a good thing.
And the reason the law was changed is there are people who go to the wrong polling place. And before the law changed, we just sent them out into the wilderness to try to find it on election day, and too many gave up. Whereas now we give them an advance ballot and say, fill this out and put it in. And next election cycle, there'll be less of a problem because we can vote anywhere in the city on election day, and we're no longer restricted to coming all the way back from work or wherever we're at to our home precinct. So there's a lot of things, and I agree with Neil here that it's better to get it right and make sure we're actually having an election that reflects the people's will than to get it done. I know as a candidate, it's very nervous to sit there and wait to find the results for another day or two, but getting it right is more important, I think.
Well, and the other issue that really came up with this election too was the move of local city county elections to summer fall instead of spring. And I know the push behind it at the time when the legislature passed it was that it was supposed to increase voter participation, even double it. Exact same percentages in Wichita for the primary between 2015 and 2019. 9.8% came out. Was the move worth it, Christy?
I would add that there were many that advocated putting every election on the same year. So you would have your local elections the same time that you would have your state elections. And there was resistance for that because if you're a local election, you're running for a mayor or city council, you want to have your own space to have time for your own message. As a former mayor, I kind of get that. You don't want to compete for airtime. So I understand that. I think it's a responsibility of our electorate. They need to get out, and we need to do a better job of encouraging them and making it accessible so they can get out.
And also that the fact that it's the same turnout as it was 4 years ago, it seems a little strange, but also the thing to remember is that we had a gigantic turnout in November of 2018 that was driven by national factors. And so there's a lot of people that wouldn't have normally been voting or maybe even registering to vote that are inspired to do that, to either vote for Trump supporting candidates or against. And so you've got those that are less likely voters. And so the candidates then for the races like this one have to go out and find those folks and get them to the polls. And frankly, the reason why Representative Whipple is up by 160 votes is he probably got just enough of those folks to come vote. So in some ways, we had a wonderful turnout last November, which means that we've got a lot more resources of getting people to the polls, but still 10% turnout is sad.
But you're comparing apples and apples, right? You're saying 9.8% from 2015, which meant we had election in March and April. Yeah. We've expanded the election cycle to August and November. So all that means is you're going to get more postcards. You're going to get more media hits. And what it didn't do, it did not change turnout at all.
No.
At all.
Okay.
There's a group of people that vote in local elections, and they voted.
And we're going to leave that right there and move on. A big moment this week for Wichita's new AAA ballpark. The last structural beam went into place at a special topping out ceremony. KSN's Jasmine Haynes takes us there.
The community, construction crews, and council members took turns signing the last structural beam to go up at the Wichita Baseball Stadium.
We stood here on February 13th for the groundbreaking, and that was about 4 innings ago. We've got 5 innings left, right? But we're winning right now. We want to keep it that way.
President EB Construction Mike Greer says the project is on schedule for completion by March 2020 and within the $75 million budget. As everyone watched the beam begin to raise to its final destination, it's a reflection of the team effort by the city, construction crews, and architects to get to this moment.
The steel topping off is really kind of the cherry on the top of the sundae, because the men and women that have worked so hard now have an opportunity to celebrate this milestone.
The topping off ceremony also marks the design phase is mostly complete.
Now we go to work on the seating bowl, we go to work on the museum, we go to work on the field, and it's the great race till opening day.
They're doing a great job of that. The design build was absolutely the right method and the approach that we needed to take.
So with this AAA ballpark, there's been a lot of controversy over how it all went down, and certainly that's going to play a role in the mayoral race, but also a lot of excitement of it coming in. In the long run, is this what South Central Kansans want as a potential entertainment venue? Chrissy, you're coming from outside of the direct metro. Is this something that would bring you and your neighbors into the Wichita area?
Well, I mean, I think that's the hope, and I applaud Mayor Longwell for being very passionate about Wichita and the metro area and wanting to do something that would be great for the river development. But the only concern that I have with that is that many times when we make big steps like this, it doesn't actually bring in the returns that we want it to bring. I hope that it does, but my biggest concern was the use of state star bonds for the project, the $40 million, and wondering whether or not we'll get that return on the investment.
And Jim, I'm going to end here with you. As a resident of Wichita, not just a representative of Wichita, lots of concerns within the city about transparency with this. Does that hurt the ballpark as it kind of comes online?
I guess my take on this is I hope it's successful. As a city, we've got about $180 million invested in this project. It's a cornerstone for the Delano area. I hope it's successful. And I hope the mayor learns some lessons about transparency and some of the blowback if he should get reelected. That especially going forward as we deal with Century 2 and the river corridor, to include people early in the discussion, not later.
All right. Well, Christy, Neil, Jim, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion. And thank you as well for we'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, Cake News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. For now, have a great week.